Hey YouTube, welcome back to Griffin Grills. We got a special video today. We're actually going to be doing a brisket. This is a 15.19 pound brisket. It is a USDA choice. And just in case you are wondering about the certification of choice, there's actually 3 different certifications for Angus beef. There is prime, which is produced from a young, well-fed cow, and it is abundant in marbling and generally served in hotels and restaurants. So if you've ever had a steak out at a steakhouse, it's usually a prime cut of meat. This one is a choice, which is a high quality but less marbled than the prime. It is juicy and tender, and is the best that you can get as far as price goes, in my opinion. You also have what's called a USDA Select. Now, usually, in my experience, Select is what you typically find at the grocery store. That would be, your Walmarts, Kroger's, Publix, places like that. I did find this one at Food Depot, and it was a choice. Prime, you would usually have to go to a butcher shop to find a prime cut of meat, and it will be a little bit more expensive. This one was a 15-pound brisket at $3.45 a pound, so I'll let you do the math. Tip, it was $50 plus. Now, when it comes to briskets, this will be the 4th attempt at a brisket that I have done. The old additive of you get what you pay for definitely applies. If you can afford to get the choice, get the choice. If you can afford to get the prime, certainly get the prime. It's going to be well worth it. The select will work. You just have to treat it a little better than you would a prime or a choice brisket. So we're going to go ahead and get this out of the packaging, and we're going to go through trimming it just a little bit. There is a couple tricks to learn as far as trimming goes. The first time I did a brisket, it really didn't turn out that great because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't really trim any fat off of it because it was an expensive cut of meat, and I thought I would be wasting it. But trimming this does make most of the difference as far as the cook process goes. The other part of that is actually made up in the cook itself. In my experience, low and slow works best. You can do a hot and fast brisket, but for me, I typically lean towards low and slow. So I will probably start this around 8 o'clock at night, and I will let it go all night, cook all night through till the next day, and then probably give it about 3 hours of rest time. You want it to rest after it cooks because it's going to absorb all that moisture back into the meat after it cooks. The last thing you want to do is spend this amount of money on a cut of meat and then cook it, take all the time and preparation, and then cut it as soon as it comes off the grill, and you lose all the juices and that meat dries out. So let me get this out of the package, and then we'll start working on the trimming. Alright, here we are out of the package, and you'll notice I kind of had to invert my cutting board to actually fit the brisket on there. Once it came out of the pack, it did loosen up a little bit and expand, and it's actually a little bigger than my cutting board can handle, but hopefully we can work around that. It is an intimidating piece of meat when you first go to cook it. There's a lot of hard fat that you're going to want to remove, like this. There's not much gray skin, what they call gray skin, but what I have found is you will find spots on the brisket that are a hard meat, usually close to the fat. That is not going to cook down or render well, so you want to just go ahead and remove that off. I'm going to be a little aggressive with my trimming just because I find that gives me a better result. If you're going for more of a competition style, there's plenty of videos out there where you can catch a video on how to trim it competition style. But this is just going to be a backyard cook, so we're just going to trim it up, get it nice and seasoned, and then we'll get it out on the grill. Alright, so the first thing we need to know about briskets is this is actually 2 cuts of meat in one product. You have what is called the flat on this end, which is usually a leaner cut of meat, and you have the point on this end, which is a more marbly, fatty type of meat. Typically, the point is where you would get what we call burnt ends from. That's actually a recipe you can look up on YouTube. I have never personally tried the burnt ends to produce them, but I do know some people that have, and maybe one day I'll get around to doing it, but right now the point is what I would refer to as a ribeye of the brisket. It's going to have the same marbling, the same kind of consistency and taste as a ribeye to me. The flat is going to be more like a hearty skirt steak. So if you like skirt steak, you might want to lean toward the flat if you go over to somebody's house and they cook one, or if you want to do one at your house. That's the best way I can describe it. The flat would be more like a skirt steak, just a heartier, more souped up skirt steak, and the point would be more of like a ribeye. So the first thing we're going to start with is taking off all of these hard pieces of fat, some of this fat skin on the top. We just want to lift that up, start coming in, cutting it away. And you can be as aggressive with your trim as you want. Just know if you can feel it and it feels hard and calloused, that's probably not going to cook down, and it's not going to absorb any flavor once you start putting your seasoning on. You really want to stick with tender meat. So we'll just trim off all these hard pieces of fat. This part right here, we can go ahead and get a little bit more aggressive with that. Because even after cutting about a 1/2 inch wedge of fat off, there's still plenty of fat up in there that's still hard and not going to render. So we'll trim that down once we get up a little closer to it. There is actually a layer of fat between these two muscles, between the point and the flat, called the decal. And that decal is just basically a seam of fat that runs in there, and that's really going to help provide a lot of flavor for this cook. And one trick that I picked up along the way is if you actually elevate this meat, it helps to get that knife under there so you can trim that off. Another good tip is to leave it in the refrigerator and let it stay cold, because the fat will actually harden up and make it a little easier to trim with your knife if that fat's hard, because it's going to give you something to go by, a reference as far as what you're actually taking off. So I'm going to keep working on this end, and then once I get this end cleaned up the way I want, we're actually going to start removing some of the fat off of the fat cap on the backside here. This is pretty much just a layer of fat. So we're going to take this down to probably to about 1/4 of an inch is what you want to stick with. You do want to keep some of that fat on there to help provide moisture during the cook, but a lot of this is going to be really thick fat, and you don't really want to keep that because that's going to keep your seasonings from penetrating the meat. So let me work on the other side, and then we'll come back and I'll show you how much I trim off of the fat cap on the back. Alright, while I was working on trimming this up, I actually am glad I found this. This is actually part of that decal that I was telling you about that separates the two different cuts of meat. And all this is a hard fat. You can press on it and feel it. It doesn't give or kind of shift any when you put weight on it. So what we want to do is just come in kind of at an angle with a knife. I find a fillet knife works best, just like you would use on your fish, and just start cutting that out kind of at a downward angle. Usually start about 45 degrees downward, slicing into it, and you can actually see when you're cutting it out that it just comes out as one large chunk of just hard fat. You know, a lot of people will render this down to make beef stock from, or use it to season beans or collards or anything like that. But today we're just going to chunk it to the side because we have no use for it. Now, you can get as good as you want about it, or you can even get it from the butcher and have them trim it up. Just tell them how you want it trimmed, and they can trim it up for you at the butcher's. And then all you have to do is bring it home, cook it, and take the glory. Alright, so we got most of that hard fat removed. We will leave a little bit in there just to help keep that meat moist during the cook. Take a few more pieces of that hard fat out. And it's kind of hard to explain to somebody that's never trimmed meat. But once you start feeling around on the fat, you'll notice what's hard and can't be saved and what can't be salvaged. And then once you start feeling around on it, you'll actually feel places where it'll give and it'll actually be tender. So now that we got this side worked on, we're just going to flip it over and work on what's called the fat cap. It's basically the layer of fat on this meat to, go between the skin and the actual meat. So we're going to work on this right now. I got a little lump right here that could have some meat in it, but you want to think aerodynamics when you're smoking, because you want this smoke to go over the meat evenly while it's cooking. So we're just going to go ahead and remove this whole section right here. I know I'm probably making the purist cringe right now, saying that you're butchering that, but as long as you're satisfied with the meat after you trim it up, that's all that really matters, because you're only cooking this for yourself, unless you're in some kind of a competition, barbecue comps. Then you might have a little stricter rules to follow, but if you're just cooking this for you and yours, you do it the way you want to do it. Alright, so here we are getting started on trimming our flat, and you'll notice that I got some red meat right here, and then I got a layer of fat here. This actually starts to taper up as far as where the meat's located and where the fat's located. It's about a ½ inch difference from here to here. So we want to take this down to where we have about 1/4 of an inch of fat on here. And the best way to do that is just to elevate the meat, to get your hand underneath it, and just start running your knife down through there. And then flip that fat back open. If you start seeing little red places, you can just kind of back your knife off and kind of work through it a little bit more, and that'll leave more of that fat on there. All you're really wanting to do is just kind of trim that meat off. Alright, we're back, and as you can see, I trimmed up this fat cap a little aggressively, but that's because I wanted to remove most of the fat cap so we could actually get that seasoning to penetrate deep into the meat. We'll go ahead and spin it around, give you a look. This is the flat side, and this is what's called the point. And you can see there's a lot more marbling in the point than what we saw originally on the fat cap. Even though we did remove a good chunk of fat out of it, we still kept a little bit in there just to help moisten up the meat during the cooking process, because that will render if you give it enough time and enough heat. Usually around low and slow, we want to stick around 225 to 250, and we'll do this for at least 12 hours plus. Right now we're going to work on seasoning this up, and we'll get it ready to go out on the smoker. Alright, so the first seasoning we're going to hit it with is actually a mix of salt, pepper, and garlic that I just transferred over into another container. It's about a 50-50 mix of coarse salt and coarse ground pepper with a little bit of garlic added in. My go-to all-purpose seasoning when it comes to beef is salt, garlic, and pepper. So I just saved myself a step and went ahead and put them all in this one container. Alright, there's our brisket all seasoned up. We're just going to set it in a container and close down the lid on that container and let it sit in the fridge overnight. We'll be starting this cook probably tomorrow, so we'll let that just sit in and soak, absorb all that flavor from the seasonings, and then when we get it back out on the grill, the temperature inside the fridge will actually help to develop a smoke ring on the meat. So we're going to close this up for right now, and the next time you see us, we should be taking this out and putting it on our smoker once we... Alright, so we're back out here at the grill, and we're just going to show you what we got going on real quick. We got our slow and sear loaded up with some charcoal. I'm using some long burning Kingsford tonight. Since I'm doing this cook overnight, I want that charcoal to burn nice and hot all throughout the night. And normal brisket uses post wood or post oak, but in Georgia that's a little hard to find, but we have pecan everywhere. So I'm just using some pecan. This is my variant of a Texas style brisket with a little Georgia flair. So we got our brisket laid on the grill. We got our probe about 2 finger widths from the grate to the meat, so that'll give us an accurate temperature inside the cooker. We also have a probe in the thickest part of the point to give us a reading there. One thing I didn't show you when I trimmed it up, I actually sliced the corner off of the brisket. Depending on which way your grains run, you want as little grain in your slices when you serve as possible. So our grain is running this way, so I want to make my slices this way, so I end up with a little piece of grain inside my slice versus a whole, you know, grain running with the slices, and you have to chew all that up. So our fire's starting to catch right now, so we're going to lower this lid down. We'll probably come back and check on this in a couple of hours. The temperature you want to shoot for is about 203. Usually when you hit 203, you're good. You just let it rest from there. We will enter what's called the stall, where the meat will climb in temperature till it reaches a certain point. If anybody tells you they know the exact temperature of the stall, they're lying. It varies from cut of meat to cut of meat. But once we do hit the stall, we are going to wrap it in tin foil, and I'm actually going to put some Parquet squeezy butter in there to give that meat a little bit more moisture so it's nice and tender and juicy. I tried that on the last brisket cook I did, and it worked so well. We're going to try it again. So we're going to let this go until we see that temperature start to, you know, stall out and not get any hotter. It was about 44 degrees when we put it on the pit, and it's already went up to 46. The pit temperature is climbing back up now from where we had the lid open. We're at 199 right now. Once this hits about 220, we'll try to hold it at that. So if it goes up to 225 or 230, we'll be fine. The dampeners, I got my top vents just barely cracked open, just maybe about that much, and the bottom vent is nearly closed off altogether. But we'll just keep an eye on those and adjust those as needed. And once we hit that stall, we're actually going to wrap up. So we'll get back with you here in a little bit. I'm going to keep monitoring this all night, and hopefully in the morning we'll have a good brisket. It is about 9:30 at night when I put this on, so we're going to let this go until at least 9:30 in the morning. That'll give us a solid 12 hours of cook time, and then we'll come back and take a look at it. The thing with a brisket is you can't really go by the temperature as much as you can go by the feel of the probe. When you stick your probe in that meat, you want it to feel like soft butter. When you feel soft butter, sticking that probe in, you know that brisket is done. So we'll come back and check on this in a little while. I'm gonna keep an eye on it tonight, and then we'll hopefully see you in the morning. Alright, so here we are the next morning. It's about 7:30. The brisket has been on the pit now for 10 hours. Did fall asleep last night, so I didn't actually get it through the stall. But we're going to go ahead and wrap it now, add some more heat, and push through. One little trick that I am going to do, though, I got my tinfoil here ready to wrap, and I'm actually going to introduce some parquet squeezy butter to help give that some more moisture. Just take your butter, and I like to lay the foil out side by side with the brisket, so I can use that as a guide to tell me how much butter to put down. You can just go from the edge of the brisket to right there. We'll pull that probe out. Set that right there in the middle of that butter. And we're just going to come back right over the top. Whew, just enough. Alright, now we're going to wrap this brisket in some foil. You want to get this wrapped pretty tight, that way you don't have any air in between there. It's obviously not going to be airtight, but we can at least get the foil as close as we can. And there we go, we'll set that back on the grill. Take our probe, and we want to try to go back in the same place where we was. We may not get there, but as long as we're in that thickest part of the brisket, because we're going to come back with our instant read here in a couple of hours and probe it to see how tender it is. So while I got the lid open, I'm going to go ahead and add some more charcoal, and we're just going to let this thing finish on out. We'll come back and check it in a couple of hours and see where we're at. Alright, so here we are back outside. It is about 10 till 11 right now, so this brisket has cooked for about 13 hours. When I wrapped it up, we did kick the temperature up a notch to help it push through that stall. It was right around 134, I want to say, and right now our temperature is up over 203. That's a good guideline to go by when you're probing the meat. So we're going to go ahead and take the lid off, and I already checked it off camera, and you can't really tell what I'm doing there, but when you push that probe in, you just want it to feel very soft, like butter, with minimal resistance. Up here on the top of the point is where I've got the least bit of resistance. It just goes in smooth. Down toward the middle, it's going in, but I still feel a slight bit of resistance. And then down here on the flat, same thing, kind of the same rigidity as the middle part here. So we're going to let this go for about another hour, and we'll come back and check on it, and hopefully be getting it in the cooler to rest and be slicing it up. So stay with us. Alright, we're back out here. It's almost 12:25, so this brisket has been on the smoker for almost 15 hours. You need that time and low heat to break down everything. We just probed it. It is buttery smooth all the way around. So now what we're going to do is wrap it in a towel and actually stick it in our cooler to let it rest. I'm going to let it rest for about 3 hours before we cut it up. Hopefully it'll be good and ready to go right before the football game. So we're just going to take our lid off. And carefully remove our probe. It will be hot, obviously. Now we just transfer the full wrap brisket to the towel, and then we're going to wrap it up. And I can feel it's jiggly, so that's a good sign. When your brisket is jiggly in the tinfoil, then you know you have all that connective tissue broke down. And I'm actually going to grab a spatula to help me get underneath. Want to try not to lose any of those juices. Alright, so now we got it on our towel. We're just going to wrap this up. You can already see it starting to leak a little bit from those juices. Now that's ready to go in the cooler, so we're just going to set it in the cooler and let it rest for about 3 hours. Give it time to let all those juices reduce back into the meat. We got some leaking right there. So let me go ahead and get this cleaned up and taken care of, and then the next time you see us, we'll actually be slicing up this brisket. Alright, so we are finally here inside with our brisket that was on the grill for 15 hours, and then we let it rest in the cooler for about 2.5 hours. You just want all that moisture to come back, and we got a nice crust built up on this, and you can see it jiggles a little bit. That's what you want to look for when it's done, is if you got that jiggle, all those connective tissues rendered down. So we're going to spin her around here. This is our point where we made the slice in the flat, so we would know which way to cut our slices. So we're just going to cut right along that. And absolutely beautiful smoke ring. I hope that's coming out on camera good. Nice crust. Still a little bit warm. And absolutely tender, just falling apart. And you want to keep the slices to about the size of a pencil. And we're just going to pick this up and give it a pull test. You just want to grab a hold of it, pull it apart, and just have it break easy like that. That's how you can tell when it's done. Alright, so let's go ahead and separate the flat from the point. Basically that muscle runs this way and the other muscle runs the other way, so we're just going to separate the two. And it helps if you got a sharp knife. Now let's just take a look at that point right there. All those juices came out fantastic. So I'm going to go ahead and finish slicing this up, and this is what we're going to be eating today. I hope you enjoyed the video. I do apologize for it running so long, but we're going to get this thing plated up and get ready to eat it. Please leave a comment below. Like, subscribe, tell your friends about it. We're trying to grow the channel right now, so anything you can do would be a great benefit and help. That's it for today. Catch us on the next video. I'm going to be trying a new recipe coming up here soon called an armadillo egg. So be on the look for that video as soon as it drops. Thank you and have a wonderful day.